Hi, my name is Andy Van Zant, and I'm a professional board game developer. And today I'm going to talk about some misconceptions about perfection, and in particular, as it relates to some aspects of rule books. So, the first thing I'm going to talk about is typos and mistakes. And really, these typos and mistakes can be anywhere in the product, not necessarily just the rule book, but the box, the board, card text, iconography being slightly wrong can be a typo, um, various other things, right? But a lot of times, when it's most noticed is in a rule book. And the reality is that basically every game has some kind of typo or incorrect thing in it somewhere. And this is despite the publisher's best effort for that not to be the case. There is always something wrong. And it is very rare. It is the exception to the rule for that not to be the case. And a lot of times when something is actually perfect, it's a much smaller product and harder to mess up on. If you've got a single sheet rule book and your cards only have numbers on them, so you as long as all those numbers are present, it's hard to mess that up, right? Uh, but the majority of products, especially in the hobby game market, that's not the case. There's a lot more information out there. There's a lot more icons and words and ways things operate. Um, but the consumer's not going to see that. They're going to see a single typo on the back of the box or in a rule book and be like, "Wow, these guys are horrible. How could they possibly have missed this?" And there are a lot of ways to miss that. Even if you're paying a professional editor, a lot of times a professional editor is catching things like your basic typos, your basic misspellings, missed punctuation, things like that. And a lot of times they aren't catching the missed context of something. Sometimes they're trying to, and sometimes those people who are trying to recontextualize the information to avoid that will accidentally leave something out or make something less clear because they're not as familiar with the product. They haven't been the one who's been playtesting it, and so forth. So even if you've got professionals involved in this process, a lot of times there's going to be an error that slips through. There's other ways errors can slip through as well. So when you hand the graphic designer the information, sometimes the as you go through edits of the thing, they'll have the rulebook file, for example, and be like, hey, here's the thing, and you're like, oh, this and this need to be adjusted, and so they'll make the changes, and then you'll do some testing and come back to them and be like, this and this need changes, different things this time. Um, but if the uh, original changes weren't saved, they were just output, uh, you might implement these new changes, but those changes in between might actually have gotten lost because of versioning issues. Sometimes it's not even a mistake. Sometimes it's the way that the PDF ends up will hide things behind layers. Sometimes you'll see a sentence and it'll be like the sentence is cut off in the middle, and that's because for some reason when the PDF was made, when it went from this InDesign document to a PDF that for print, this line of text, instead of wrapping to the next line, continued behind a picture or something like that, and and it's very hard for people to catch that kind of thing, especially if they've looked at the thing a whole bunch of times, and it's even harder if that piece of information that's gone missing as a result of whatever happened, versioning issues or quirk of the technology or whatever. There's more than just that can cause these things. That little piece of information, if it doesn't look like it's integral to the structure of the sentence or the structure of what's being said, even a professional who's reading through the document afterwards might not realize that that sentence is missing or that piece of the information is missing. Uh, you could it could not it might not even be the middle of a sentence. It might be a couple of sentences, and and it gets perfectly cut off there, and then gets hidden behind this other thing, and it looks like it's a complete thought, and they don't notice it. It's the same reason why a spell checker might not catch certain misspellings, because the, the misspelling is still a word. You've got there and there is a good example. Various homophones that are still words, so they won't get caught by traditional spell checkers. And sometimes those things are um, correct within the context of the sentence. They could be interpreted in the way in which they were misspelled. Um, and you'll see that a lot. I mentioned homophones, but you've got die is a good one. I like using dice to mean the physical rolling object way more than die in every situation that you can imagine, because die can mean a dice. It can mean for something to be destroyed. It could mean the cutout. It can mean if misspelled, it could mean the color that something is dyed. Um, and those kind of changes are uh, very hard for people to catch, even professionals, even going through multiple professionals. Um, and people will be like, oh no, that's not true. It is, and a good way to look at this is to go and to talk to professional book editors, not rule book editors, but like editors of novels. And they will tell you the same thing. There's basically no book, or very few books out there that don't have a misspelling in it somewhere. And that's despite these people whose full-time jobs it is to go through these things and find these errors. It's despite their best efforts, the reality is that the majority of books out there have a typo in them somewhere. If you want to argue that point, the reality is that you're just not catching those typos because they are there. Uh, and so uh, that's the first thing I want to talk about is that um, perception on the end of consumers that that anything short of perfection is a massive failing on the part of the company. So the things you can do about that is to learn from your mistakes. Whenever you have that occur, try and pinpoint what caused it, and try and set up fail safes. And there's no company out there, uh, Hasbro, Mattel, Asmodee, none of them have the fail safes that prevent this from occurring 100% of the time. And the consumers will feel that's not the case, that there is perfection to be had. uh, as a um, as a publisher, you should strive towards that, but realize that that's not the case, and maybe set up some fail-safe systems for when that occurs. And my biggest suggestion on this point would be to always have a link to your website at the end of the rules saying, at the end of the rules say, uh, most up-to-date version of the rules available here on your website. And that way, when those inevitable problems occur, you can have the fix, and the fix is in the rulebook. It's pointing to this living document that you can change as time goes on your website. It's not asking to replace the what's included in the box. It is just supporting it for the consumer afterwards. Um, and that is one part of what you should do. Like I said, you should still strive to always be improving, but that little thing can save you a lot of headache in the long run. You won't have people calling for you to reprint a 16-page book because you left out an A, or a picture was upside down somewhere in the rulebook. Things that don't actually affect things. And if you think that consumers don't ask for this completely unreasonable thing, uh, I assure you they do. Um, so uh, the other thing regarding perfection is component counts in rule books in particular, also on the back of boxes, but more often in rule books. So a lot of times you'll send out a game and it's got X amount of this and X amount of that and X amount of this. And I'm gonna start with the piece of advice first, and then we'll work backwards. The piece of advice is anytime you've got a component that is either unlimited or which you provided more of than you would ever need for the person, uh, you shouldn't say exactly how many there are of in the rulebook, and people are going to argue about this. I have seen entire Facebook threads of people freaking out about this concept that you shouldn't say that there's lots of red cubes or uh, a pile of red cubes or mini of something. Um, that you should be exact so that the people can count it exactly because it needs to be perfect, and it doesn't need to be perfect because the reality is that it's not somebody sitting there packing this box and going 1 cube, 2 cubes, 3 cubes, 4 cubes. They are packaging almost everything by weight. um, and even when you're talking about something like cards, it's somebody sitting there flicking through a stack of cards looking for a particular key card and pulling it out and out the packet and setting it over and then flicking through to the next key card and pulling it out and setting it through to be shrink wrapped. Sometimes this is automated and sometimes not. Both automated and humans have things that can mess up the way that process works. And so again, um, perfection is not achievable. There is no company or product that when you're talking about having all sorts of little bits of something that ends up with a perfect product. Um, but what you can do about that is avoid the need for perfection. And so by saying this box contains lots of red cubes or uh, mini coins in various denominations, you hedge your bets. And as long as as long as that precision is not needed, as long as you never, like some games, for example, will have a specific number of victory points because when the victory points runs out, that ends the game, or have a specific amount of money because the money or resource or whatever is supposed to be finite by a specific amount. And that's when it's important to have the specific amount. Otherwise, it's better to just include more than is needed and to say lots of. Um, and uh, and uh, like that's such an easy thing to do, and it prevents you from spending extra money sending out replacements that aren't needed. If a thing has 27 red cubes in it, but you will only ever need 22, um, and somebody gets 26, you're going to be spending time and money sending out this replacement to everybody who's missing that one. If you had instead just said lots of red cubes, you uh, have more satisfied customers and have saved money because when somebody is like, oh, something's wrong, that's a dissatisfied customer. Even if you have the opportunity to make it right, even if you have the opportunity to uh, swap them over, you also have a bunch of missed opportunities that you never realized were there of people who just didn't turn it in, didn't send you a message about it. They just accepted that it was bad and are grumbling in their head about it. So hedge your bets and don't tell people you're hedging your bets because again, people expect this perfection that is completely unreasonable. Um, and so uh, it is a better choice for you and for the customer satisfaction to uh, to know that perfection is not attainable and to take the easy actions that don't ignore that. Thanks for watching. I'll talk to you next time.